We are live, and welcome to the first official episode of the MMAngst podcast. I am your host, Ben Cohn, and with us today we have a new addition to the group who hopefully will be able to join us in the future. We have Mehul Kumar, and of course we brought back Bilal and Alejandro because we love them and they're great at this. We're going to do some quick introductions to the first official episode. We're going to start with Mehul. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello guys, my name is Mehul Kumar. I'm from India. I love MMA. Yeah, I think that's it.
Scintillating stuff there, Mehul. Next, we have Bilal. Once again, introduce yourself for the audience. Hopefully, we'll have a little bit of a wider one after this.
Okay, so I'm Bilal Yusuf, as was my last podcast, formerly Dead Potato. I also love MMA, but I come from South Africa, so bit of a space away from everyone else. Yeah, that's about it.
Slightly longer, a little bit more about you. This is good. This is good podcast listening. Finally, we have our sexy physicist. We have physicist. I think I said that correctly. Alejandro.
Hi, I am Alejandro Castellanos Jaramillo. I'm as you mentioned, I'm a physicist. I'm studying postgrad in nanotechnology. It's a PhD program, and I also quite like MMA. And holy shit, something sounded weird. Okay, no, fine. No, I got some of those notifications that I don't know where it came from. But anyways, I also like MMA, and Bilal tells me that a lot of Mexican fighters are very good looking, which makes me happy.
As it should.
As it should. And we're going to be talking MMA a little bit.
Yes, we are. That is definitely what this podcast is going to be about. Just real quick to introduce myself, I am Ben Cohn. We all had this idea to do a podcast, and now we're actually making it come to fruition. I work in the nursing home finance field as a ER supervisor. That has nothing to do with MMA, sadly. We're going to be talking today about UFC 230 and the shocking upset in the main event. Daniel Cormier was able to defend his heavyweight title. I don't know how. It doesn't make any sense to anybody. He was a huge underdog against a massive and vastly superior fighter in every way possible and Derek Lewis. I don't understand how this happened. It doesn't make any sense. We're going to talk about all our reactions to this crazy upset. No. Anyway, what we're actually going to be discussing is the idea of game planning and not inorganic, but the process and benefits of game planning for the fights versus a lot more of the organic in-fight decisions that are made and how that played into the main event, also in some of the other fights like the co-main as well of Joshua Weidman and the scintillating performance of Israel Adesanya versus Derek Brunson. Those are the three fights we're really going to cover. Although if the gentlemen in this podcast have some other fights we'd like to discuss, we might just add them in if we have some time. We're going to get rolling here. We're going to start with Mehul. Please tell us your thoughts on the main event of Daniel Cormier versus Derek Lewis.
It was a shocking result. I was so surprised. But if we actually come to the serious part, what struck me most was just, and I know he was a huge favorite, but just how composed DC looked. And it just seemed, the commentators also made a point to mention that he was smiling throughout the fight. And I think because the topic is about game planning and scouting and as opposed to a more freewheeling approach to the cage, I just thought it just pointed out how important game planning is and how good DC's team is, because we generally tend to credit Jack Wing, deservedly so, for being excellent game planners. But AKA has also given us excellent game plans over the years. We just had Conor and Habib, and we had JDS and Cain Velasquez 2 and 3. And it just made me look at just how composed DC looked. For instance, when Derek Lewis decided he was just going to get up the way he always decides. I mean, DC was not thrown off by the fact that Derek just got up. In the first round, he kept at his back. He got him down again. The second round, he kept a front headlock, and then he picked his ankle, and then just threw him down to the ground again. And it just made me think that perhaps, like, as many jokes as we might crack about AKA and all of their knee extensions and how all of them, don't really consider knees to be really necessary, more of a luxury which we can forego. But like, just the entire idea of constantly sparring hard, sparring difficultly, like, I think that just creates a sense of composure inside the cage, and that just allows people to remain calm. And I think that is an invaluable trait to have because, first of all, scouting. When, for instance, Lewis threw a couple of head kicks, and somehow, like, whenever he would actually start throwing in his previous fights, his opponents would be stunned, as if like they had no idea where that came from. Like, what the hell is happening? How can he just throw punches? And DC just kept on. Like, he absolutely did not get disturbed to any significant degree. And he also, like, when Lewis decided to get up, he brought him back down. And we also saw this, for instance, I just thought of this, like, when Habib faced when he faced Johnson, and he did get tagged with a couple of shots early, and although the effect of it has been significantly exaggerated over the years now, especially because of Joe Rogan just screaming, he's hurt, he's hurt. He was not. He was not. I mean, like, he might have been annoyed, but he was not hurt. But he also did not basically lose his calm, and he remained on on Johnson. And that, I think, just goes on to show the value of extreme hard sparring, as unfavorable as some people might look on that particular aspect of training, because we know, from what I understand, Connor looks down unfavorably on it. Even Tony Ferguson says he does not spar. I mean, Tony Ferguson is too cool for most things in this world.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, and I was just contrasting that, for instance, the game planning bit with how Derek Brunson approached his fight. Because he was just like, he had this idea that, okay, Israel Adesanya, not a good wrestler. What will I do? I will wrestle him. I mean, that's not a bad idea, but you can only execute it when you have properly sparred, when you actually know how to game plan, when you actually know how to scout. And that was one thing where he was extremely lacking, and he basically, instead of actually taking down Israel, he basically gave him a read on all of his movements and turned into a human highlight reel. The unfortunate victim of a human highlight reel, because there was no nuance to his game planning. And that came from perhaps not sparring with elite teammates, or for whatever reason. But what makes it interesting is, I think, when we look at Jacare versus Chris Weidman, because I think the Chris, as all of us, like some of us at least like to call him, he had a good game plan. I think he was doing well, and like one time he did try to take, and that was part of the plan, the takedown, because Matt Serra yelled, take him down. He got reversed in 5 seconds, and he went back to boxing with it. So it was a good game plan, but ultimately it did not come off because he was just not defensively responsible enough to execute that game plan. And that just, like, for instance, yeah, things went wrong, and perhaps we might discuss what he could have done differently or what he could have done better as far as game planning is concerned, or scouting is concerned. But I think that is often an underrated part of MMA training, and that is one reason why when somebody refuses a short notice fight, a lot of fans look down on that fighter, like, oh, just a coward, just a complete loser. And I don't think that's fair, because we are just seeing, there was no reason for Lewis to win his last fight, but he did. And because somebody just clearly lost their crap in the middle of the ring, and Volkov had no idea what to do. And that is something which I thought we might explore, and because I don't think that's talked about as much as it should be. And like it's just again, Weidman and Jacare, it was a good game plan, and but again and again we have seen that the key to winning, like especially these high pressure fights, is to have like a good game plan and to know how to execute it through rounds and rounds of sparring, which basically instills in you the correct kind of muscle memory, and the correct kind of muscle memory goes a long way. So yeah, I think that's what we wanted to talk about. And we could use a lot of examples, Khabib's example, for instance. But yeah, I think that is one thing I thought we might focus on, and we should.
Excellent point, Bilal. Thank you. What do you think, Bilal? Let's hear your thoughts on this overarching theme we have here.
Okay, just to wind back a bit to DC Lewis, since we started there. Yeah, I agree with Mehul on hard sparring being kind of looked down upon weirdly these days. But I mean, it's true also for what base you come into MMA with. Because DC has been wrestling at high levels for years. So if he wanted to adjust to something or push for game plan in that area, he could. He had the base skills all there. And if there was some resistance, he had more than enough skills to spare. It wasn't just a case of, Lewis's previous fights where the guys they can shoot a takedown, but if he just stands up, they reset. Because, I mean, Travis Brown's ground game or Alexander Volkov's ground game, it's not on the same level as DC's clearly is. But yeah, I mean, it extends to hard sparring also because Mehul used Khabib as an example earlier. He's, for instance, surprisingly harder to hit than someone who looks classically better like Kevin Lee. Because when you see Kevin Lee fight, he often comes in with his head straight online, and after he punches, he stands there for a second too often and then gets clocked right back. And that bites him. Whereas with Khabib, you see he likes being all the way on the outside where you can't touch him. But even when he's pressuring, it's not exactly fundamentally right, but he does move his head a bit more than Kevin Lee, especially when he's trying to push for the pocket, and he'll do that sort of awkward ducking his head, looking down at the floor, weave,
Which
and
DC does a lot.
doesn't get which DC does a lot as well, and that shows the comfort that they've gathered in hard sparring because you are going to get hit in hard sparring, so you learn not to panic. And Khabib clearly doesn't panic when he's in a bit of trouble. Keeps moving his head even though it's really, really bad form. Whereas Kevin Lee, everything looks good, but his striking defense doesn't seem to actually reflect that. I mean, even if you compare the two spinning wheel kicks Barboza tried landing, when it was against Khabib, both times he got his guard up and then took a step to the direction that the kick was traveling so as to take some of the snap off. Whereas Kevin Lee just kind of put a guard up thinking it was a body kick, stood in the same place he was before and get clocked on the forehead or the side of the head, one of the two. But yeah, I mean, Lewis is just weird. I mean,
yeah, he is.
Perhaps, but he is fantastic still. We know what he's doing. He's not here to be the best fighter in the world. He's here to make money, and he's been very honest about it. He just happened to get his ass handed to him, but good for him.
Man, he's like Jack Black on Gulliver's Travels. Like he's just so big that no one can normally compete with him. And I mean, who stands up from full mount just like that?
Derek.
And
if he had started wrestling when he was younger, can you imagine where he would be today?
If you had trained for 3 hours. Well, if you had trained for like more than 3 hours every day in normal camps, maybe.
If he learned,
I'm
could
sorry.
you imagine if he learned how to do some good clinch takedown? Because in the clinch, he's got a decided strength advantage over everyone. Imagine if he just learned like 2 clinch takedowns, but really well.
If you're talking about athleticism, he has a distinct advantage over like everyone because he's throwing jump kicks every 4 seconds. He has to cut down to 265. His
Has
girth
any
is
of
like,
his
I
jump
don't
kicks
know.
ever landed?
What's important?
That's the thing. He's throwing like 50 a minute. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but a lot, and it takes a while for him to gas. Like his
It's really
cardio
not
is.
whether they land or not. Okay.
Could we say that he's more athletic than Ngannou? Could we actually say that?
What'd you say?
Could we argue that he is more athletic than Francis Ngannou?
It depends on
Sure.
how we define athleticism.
I don't know.
Well, that's a fair point. Explosive. Well, the normal parameters for when one describes athleticism is that they have good cardio. He doesn't, but he doesn't train cardio. But either way, he lasts 15 minutes fight. He doesn't get.
Francis is quicker and like he's more explosive, but
No, he's not.
But he cannot get up. He cannot get up the way Lewis gets up.
He cannot.
Because he's not cutting weight. Lewis has 40 pounds on Ngannou. There's a difference. Like it's also the distribution of their weight is probably a lot different as well.
Maybe I'm just seduced by the fact that this guy who doesn't really train to be a fighter gets as far as he has.
Yes, I think that's a different issue. We can definitely talk about that topic another time, but let's stay the course here.
Okay,
Andrew, what are your thoughts on this overall topic we're exploring here?
Yeah, I'm going to be more general here. The way that I looked at it was that it's not necessarily about whether people train hard or whether they are improvising a lot, but it's more about whether they are responsible in their improvisation. Because the fighters that we're looking at as having good game plans, they do not necessarily adhere to them as much as I think we would think from looking at it at first sight, because it seems like the people that are playing around, so to speak, that they're not as stringent in their technique are mostly people that do not have a strong base in the sport, or they are fighting somebody that has a strong base and does not let them work. For example, Brunson, we are saying that he was telegraphing his shots. He was giving away his timing, but at the same time, Adesanya is a fantastic striker. He has a magnificent base for striking, and the way he controls his space in relation to his opponent and the way that he moves around him limits a lot of his possibilities, really. So Brunson was doing the best that he could do given what he was trying to do, which was clinch. He was not trying to strike with him. And for example, when it came to DC, he just has this massive technical advantage over Lewis. So Lewis cannot really do much there, which is not the thing that he has done in every fight. And being there, he has a chance, explode, and quote unquote do something. But
see, I agree with that.
Yes,
I agree with that. But if you look at his previous fight with Volkov also had an advantage over him as far as technical superiority was concerned. But I mean, I guess that he perhaps was not used to sparring with people in a realistic manner wherein they would actually like attack him the way Lewis ultimately did, because he just seemed completely lost. As soon as Lewis started doing something that was unexpected in the last minute of the round, like he just stood there and went to the body, I think, a couple of times with his knees. Like, I just don't see that. I don't see DC making that kind of mistake ever. And I know DC is a much better fighter than Volkov is, but I think some of that is also down to having so many rounds of sparring where unexpected things happen to you. And you just learn to adjust and deal with it.
But at the same time, you do not train for getting clocked the way Darius Lewis is going to clock you.
Yeah, that's true.
And also, Volkov kind of gave that fight away, because he landed a bunch of volume on him, and then he sort of tried to get cute and got hit for his trouble. So it's about being responsible, whether you're improvising or not in the end. Derek Lewis is not responsible. He has what he has, and he does what he can with it. But for example, Brunson was not responsible because he allowed Adesanya to dictate the terms of their engagement from very early on. Because Brunson, we know he gets a little worked up, and so he tends to either rush things or not rush enough. So he's always in this working out of these polar opposites as far as his game plan go. I mean, his game plan was likely to clinch him, get him to the ground, and do work there. Because we saw that Adesanya is not fantastic once his back hits the mat, but at the end of the day, he couldn't do it because he was not allowed to, because this other person, Adesanya, has an incredibly good base, and he was actually being a little bit improvisational in there. I think that once you have enough of an ability, of technical ability, you can allow yourself to play. Like, look, for example, Weidman and Jacare. Weidman has worked a ton on his striking, a hell of a lot, but so has Jacare. But Weidman was trying to fight a fight that he hasn't fought. Like, for example, do you remember when he fought Machida and when he fought Rockhold? He was cutting the cage and walking down his opponent, and once he had him where he, with his back to it, he would engage. And in terms that were favorable to him, but he wasn't doing that here. He was trying to work at a distance, which, credit to him, worked for a while. But then Jacare adjusted and started infighting with him.
I think that's just a product of him knowing that his chin isn't where it used to be, and he can't take the same amount of punishment. Just that's my thought process, because we saw him try to do it against Kelvin Gastelum as well, where he was actually backing up.
But my point is that he does not have developed that kind of game yet.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's not going to hold up when he gets pressed, which is what happened with Gastelum. But I mean, mind you, he won that fight. But here again, it just didn't work. It just didn't work. So what we're looking at is Weidman trying to develop habits, right? But he's not being exactly responsible in the way he carries them out, because he just doesn't have enough repetitions, which maybe builds up to Bilal's point that you need, and also Mehul's, that you need this strong sparring sessions. But Weidman, I'm not sure, can do that anymore. I don't think he can go bang it out in the gym anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bilal, I know you had some thoughts you wanted to also.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, with regard to the game plan, I don't think it's just having a good base or having simply, an idea that I want to do X, Y, Z. The idea you have to keep in mind is it usually is focused around some central sort of basic idea that you want to work behind. Like, do you want to pressure the guy to the fence and then take him down after combinations? And with regard to that, everything also has to be done in layers. So you look at DC, let's say DC versus Lewis, and Adesanya versus Brunson for counterexamples to Weidman. Both of them came with specific, simple ideas. DC wanted to wrestle Lewis until he gave up a compromising position. Adesanya wanted to stick Brunson on the outside and punish him whenever he tried closing the distance, right? Then you go a layer deeper. In order to get the clinch, DC had to engage Lewis in striking. So he then pressured, didn't get discouraged by the shots Lewis was throwing back, and then just waited until he could shoot in for his legs. Adesanya, I think in this case, Brunson helped him a bit by panicking on the feet, but he forced Brunson to shoot from a little too far out, where he could then get that fast sprawl he showed off and whizzer, or clinch up with him where he didn't look terrible defending clinch takedowns. I suppose that's also due to kickboxing and Muay Thai allowing quite a bit of clinch work.
Can I just make a quick comment there? Can I just make a quick comment there? That's kind of what I was saying, that Adesanya was dictating the terms of the engagement for the most part. And it's interesting because that's something that we have not seen in MMA, that a striker of that caliber that can do an equivalent of what wrestlers are doing, which is dictate the terms of engagement. And for the longest time, we have been told that wrestling is the best base for starting MMA, but that I have the hypothesis that that's only because somebody that is a good enough striker has not shown up yet. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, no, I agree with you there, but we have seen strikers try that in the past. But
but
going
not
back to the game plan, you always need a bit of flexibility when you encounter some issues in a fight, right?
of
So
course.
by having it around a central idea with layers beneath that there, you have space to move around. It's not like Branson just thinking, okay, well, his legs are sort of close to me, I should shoot now and then fail. Because that is thinking, I want to wrestle, so let's wrestle. And then you don't pay attention to everything else going on at the moment. And that's kind of where Branson seemed to get caught. But
He had no plan
you look
B.
at why, well, not about plan B. He knew what he wanted to do, but he didn't game plan deep enough to know how to do it, if that makes sense.
Yes, but I'm not sure. But I think that he was, I mean, likely, like this guy's a professional, so he likely had a plan B, so to speak. Like, what happens if I don't clinch with him in the first tries? He probably would have to strike with him, and he probably trained that. But
I don't
I,
think that Brunson ever has a plan B.
well, fair
Yeah.
argument because we see him panic a lot, or maybe that's just how he is. But he's so I
Yeah,
don't know. He's like a contracted muscle just waiting to explode, and sometimes
yeah.
he explodes into like waiting and not doing anything, and then he just
He just
fucking
never explodes. So
yeah. I'm confused.
Yeah. But just going back to Weidman and Jacare, both of them seem to come out with pretty set game plans. Jacare wanted to pressure and counter, and Weidman wanted to stick on the outside and get off combinations and then wrestle, it seems. But
Yeah,
the difference seemed to be, I mean, I agree with Alejandro on this, that Weidman isn't that defensively responsible. But his defense didn't look too bad in half the exchanges. What
well,
seemed
if
to
I may
get him caught,
sorry.
what seemed to get him caught was, what seemed,
Just let me say something. He did look good. Like I'm not saying that he did not look good. Like he looked fantastic. I mean, this may be his best, in my opinion, his best performance in a while. But he just doesn't have enough repetitions yet.
well, halfway there, I'm with you halfway there. His defense looked good when he was initiating the exchanges or pressuring Jacare. When he got put on the back foot or Jacare fired off a counter that he wasn't expecting, his head was dead center line and there to be hit always. And that sort of goes back to what we saw in the Rockhold fight also, where he just doesn't have a lot to offer when you put him on the back foot. And conversely, Jacare seemed to have adapted to that issues Weidman was giving him by just going for the clinch and then bombing him from there. And once he zoned in on that, it seemed that he just started stalking forward like a Terminator. Then, if Weidman stood his ground, they ended up in the clinch. Jacare started hurting him in the clinch. And if Weidman tried firing back at him, he tried stinging him with counters. And Jacare still got hit, but it made Weidman unsafe to be in the area around him. So when Weidman got put on the back foot because of that, his defense kind of fell apart. And then that just snowballed from there, especially with the body shots Jacare was hitting with. And that, I'm not sure if the clinch was game plan, part of Jacare's game plan, but it did show that the original idea he came in with, he tweaked it slightly because going for a clinch isn't that too far off from aggressive counterpunching in the first place. And once he took it from there, Weidman didn't have another layer to offer him. I mean, he tried shooting in and then that failed. Then he just didn't try again. So, yeah. And that I think is the core difference between a fighter like, let's say, Brunson and Lewis versus Weidman. Whereas Brunson and Lewis, they came in with, Lewis wanting to just throw that haymaker and knock DC out, and Brunson with this, I'm going to wrestle him. But the whole base and game plan around that just didn't fit. Whereas Weidman came in with a good game plan and it was working at the start. But when Jacare pushed a layer deeper, Weidman just wasn't there.
Yes,
So, yeah.
but just one more thing. That kind of also shows us the difference that Weidman seems to have put way more work into his overall game than Brunson seemingly has, right? Because even though both came up short, there are ways of coming up short. And Weidman, he can say he held his head high, whereas Brunson, he didn't really get much of a chance to do a lot. Everything, he just collapsed at the end. Like he couldn't quite deal with this thing that he was being presented with, and just didn't have an answer. Whereas Weidman, you can actually see him trying to make adjustments, though they didn't work in the end, but he held in there.
Well, Brunson has always had that confidence issue thing where I'm not entirely certain he's ever confident, because he either comes out running at someone like a wild man as if he needs to finish them, otherwise someone's going to shoot his dog, or he's just way too scared and just stays all the way on the outside and barely does anything. So he's one of those guys at middleweight who are just janky as hell.
Yeah.
So a couple of things I want to add into this overall discussion. One, a lot of the discussion, obviously, when you're talking about game planning and the organic ability to either stop or do things differently in a fight to kind of deviate a little bit from the game plan if necessary, are all, it definitely are insanely important. But of course, we need to know that, you have to have the skills and abilities to perform these things. Of course, we're not discounting that. That's not we're not just pretending that doesn't matter. You have to be able to pull off the game plan. But in a general sense, what I saw in these three fights are things that we can actually garner from their other fights. So for DC, that his game plan, he was able to stick to it because of Derek Lewis's inability to prevent him from implementing that game plan. We look at DC's fights with Jones. His game plan was the game plan, and he couldn't deviate from it. And the reason for that is because of the way he trained. In AKA, his training method is they go hard on sparring, and what they do is what they do, and that's really it. And when was the last time we saw an AKA fighter switch up their game plan mid-fight? They're all very, they're, for the most part, they're pretty much like a one-size-fits-all for their style, for their individual fighters. DC style is currently pressure fighting. It's what he's best at right now. Pressure fighting, get in the clinch, get on top, finish you. What's most impressive about him was that he can do a kick and move, or he used to be able to. Now it's kind of like duck away Khabib style and try to make them miss as many punches until you can get the clinch, at least at heavyweight, which is working. Can't deny that. But we contrast that to someone like Jacare, who, while his entire game plan was focused around the pressure, in the first round, what was he doing? He was working a slow and steady pressure fighting game, and he lost that round. That was the round that Chris Weidman was able to employ his newer style, where he's trying to change things up, his stick and move. He's trying to chip away at the Jacare from the outside, and he was landing better punches. Jacare, at one point, until Jacare just figured out, I'm just going to walk him down. That's where I was having the most success in the first round. We saw him employ that more and more as the fight went on until he was able to get the finish, and Chris could not handle it. The Chris was not able to handle the pressure. And, which, just a quick tangent, I know there's a trope where the things that fighters do the most are the things they're most afraid of happening to them, which really would hold true for Chris, because he was a pressure fighter his entire career. He would break fighters, and whenever he was pressured, he would fall apart. And I think that's something that's really interesting when you think about it, and I would love to maybe delve into that another time as a more deep, in-depth topic. But if we look at something like Brunson, who had a good game plan, we know he did. His game plan, if he planned to strike with Adesanya, that's idiotic. That's dumb. Don't do that. That's dumb. But he didn't have the ability to implement that, not because he doesn't have wrestling skills. He's a good wrestler, although his actual takedown abilities and everything are, you know, but his problem was that he never, because of his athletic gifts, he's never really had to learn how to close the distance intelligently. So you look at someone like contrasting him with two pressure fighters in Jacare and DC, who know how to close the distance safely, or I guess they can eat a couple before they close the distance. And you compare that to Brunson versus a phenomenally skilled, intelligent fighter. How in the world are you, like, how can you implement your game plan if you are missing the key tool to close the distance? And I think comes back to the sparring thing. DC and Jacare and Weidman, in his prime, I guess, all worked on those tools because that was their game plan. And you could see that they definitely worked on it and they closed the distance intelligently. And Brunson just never seemed to have that. And granted, it could be the confidence issue. Mehul, I know you want to say something, so go ahead. What did you want to say?
No, you just answered my question. It was about sparring. I was just gonna use Khabib's example as well, because he's also not somebody who's very comfortable with striking. But clearly, rounds and rounds of sparring has made him have a functional understanding of when to shoot, for instance, and when to not shoot. Of course, he's much more skilled than Brunson is, but I do think sparring plays a part in that.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. We always talk about, sparring is killing these fighters and it's destroying their ability to have longevity and all that, and you should do less hard sparring. And while that is true, probably as you get later in your career, if you don't get all that hard sparring in when you're earlier and you're, like, for lack of a better term, your brain can take it. It's very important to get that understanding and that distance management, those distance management skills. Because if you don't, you're not going to have it later in your career, and that's when your body starts to fail you. So if you don't have that later in your career, earlier in your career, and never develop it, you're going to look like someone like Brunson, who, while supremely athletic, still, he's now been knocked out multiple times. He's not going to be able to keep going the way he has because he just doesn't have the skills. And for someone like Weidman, we look at somebody who his body is failing him, his chin is failing him, but he just doesn't have the ability to change his style now because he just hasn't had the time to develop it. And you look at a guy like DC, he has developed a lot of the skills necessary in order to have the body fails him. For goodness sake, he threw out his back sneezing before the fight. That's the most dad thing ever. Yes. Secondly, watching him struggle to take off his shirt at the station before getting into the cage, also the most dad thing ever. I was watching that and going, "You're all of our dads, DT. You're all of our dads."
Especially the way his kids were also embarrassed by him.
Just one thing I wanted to say. We were talking about quality sparring. It makes me think about a comment Donald Cerrone made about Jackson Wink, which is where Brunson trains at, that you can throw enough money at them that they will train you to spar with anyone. You remember it when he said that?
That's true, and that's actually something that might be awesome.
Shouldn't that be showing it here? I mean, I know it's very difficult, probably impossible, to find somebody that will spar with you the way Adesanya strikes. But there's it seems like if Brunson is beholden to this idea that somebody can come into the gym and he doesn't know anything, but he paid into his ability, so his chance to train with them, wouldn't that be a problem? Like, isn't he missing valuable time that he could be spending sparring with better qualified people? I would say that might be significant, especially if you're fighting fucking Israel Adesanya, right?
For sure. I would. All right. So I know Bilal has one final point to add. Then we're gonna have to say goodbye to our buddy Mehul. he's got to take leave for this before this next topic. But we'd love to have Bilal have his final point, and then we'll say goodbye to our and we'll cry a little bit.
Okay. Okay, yeah. I just wanted to mention that I think Brunson left Jackson Wink a couple years ago, and
Really?
yeah, I think it coincides with the decline of his transitional skills also. Because there's one thing you can't knock Jackson Wink on is that they know how to train transitions, striking technique aside. But yeah, going back to the deadest man on the planet, um, there is one thing I wanted to build on to what Ben said, where the AKA guys, the really successful ones anyway, seem to come out with one set style. It's that their game planning nowadays seems to focus on like these little small technical areas that they'll draw out and then use that into their to lead into their pressure game. Such as DC waiting for Lewis to throw one of those haymakers before he glides into the clinch, or Khabib wanting to draw out on his left hand before he actually shoots. So it's a bit of a. I don't think it's a perfect way to game plan, but it is a bit of a testament to their skill in game planning that they're able to make a set style work in really specific areas by planning. Whereas someone like Brunson, as I mentioned earlier, was like, "Yeah, cool. I'm just gonna shoot right now from 2 meters away and hope you don't sprawl."
Yep.
Yeah.
That's yeah. And that with that, we're definitely going to move on from this topic. But we're also first say goodbye to Mahol. Mahol, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully, you can join us for full episodes next time.
Yeah, it was my pleasure, guys. I can't wait for the next one, and let's all remember, wrestle boxers will rule this world.
I mean,
Okay?
yeah, but that goes without saying. As the South African Khabib Nurmagomedov, I approve.
Yeah. Right, guys. See you soon.
All right.
See you.
Bye, Mel.
Bye.
I'm
All right.
actually wondering whether Brunson is still in Jackson Wink.
It says he's still in Jackson Wink. I checked his. I mean, it is Wikipedia. So
Yes, that's
I don't
right,
know
guy.
how accurate that is. It says he's Team Henzo Gracie and he's Team Jackson Wink. So anyway, moving on. We're going to discuss our second topic, and we're going to use Sugar Shane. I think it's Sugar, right? Sugar Shane Burgos as our lead into that topic. We're going to talk about featherweight prospects, and we're going to take a look at them as a whole. I know this is really well, and I proxy us because we're all just a hive mind. We don't really have disagreements. Let's talk about it because we saw some interesting things from Shane Burgos, and I know that I was rather harsh on him before the podcast. I think in the chat we were discussing, and I still kind of think I should be pretty harsh on him. I was not happy with that performance personally as a fan. I enjoyed watching him fight. I thought he had a lot of potential coming up, and then he got knocked out by Calvin Kattar. That was shocking to many, including myself at the time. I did think that Shane. I didn't expect Kattar to knock him out. I expected it to be a fun, awesome fight, but I thought Burgos would eventually take a decision. To see him get finished like that was weird, and then to see him get knocked down by Kurt Hollabo, I don't know how to pronounce that. That was bad. That's a bad sign. And I wanted him to move up after the Calvin Kattar fight. I think he still needs to move up. He's cutting a significant amount of weight. And I think that his reflexes are betraying him at this weight class. I don't think he can keep moving the same way he used to. He's a reactive counterpuncher who, as Bilal will point out, relies solely on head movement as his only real defense. Which is not good if you can't react to the punches. And Kurt is not exactly a fighter with blistering hand speed. He's going to be able to catch you even if you're very defensively sound. But let's get into let's hear from Bilal first on his thoughts on Shane Burgos, and then we'll kind of deviate into the other prospects we'd like to talk about.
Okay, yeah. So, well, I half agreed with Ben because I was also quite harsh on him after the fight. There didn't seem to be a real change in his style from the Kattar fight, but I do disagree on him looking, a tad slower. because the one thing Alabon did was follow up in combinations. And if you're just going to be relying on, reactive head movement, then when someone fires the first punch and you see it, you move your head out the way to the side. Then if they follow up with, let's say, 2 strikes after that, you're going to have to keep your focus so on point that you will see both of those follow up in less than the span of a second and then still have time to move your head out the way. And that's kind of what it seemed like he was getting hit with a lot, where Hollabon, we either he'd fire off multiple jabs or he'd follow up with a combination. And um, Burgos did a good job of, slipping the first shot, but as soon as others came in there, you can't react to every shot like that there. You either have to keep your head constantly moving, even if you don't know the direction the shots are coming, or you have to use a bit of defensive footwork or throw up an arm for a guard or something, just to give yourself more layers and more room to not get hit.
Well,
But yeah, this fight wasn't a good display because he got dropped by that combination and then he recovered fast, but he had all the time to, learn from the cattle loss, and he just didn't seem to learn from it. He was doing the same stuff. He'd slip a punch, he didn't move his feet, he didn't throw up his hands for guards, he didn't really fire off counters every time Hollabon threw. He'd wait for his perfect shot, rely on his reaction time, and when the reaction time failed him, he'd get clocked.
Well, that's the thing. I think he was even getting hit. That's the thing. I think he's been able to dodge at least like the first, second, and sometimes even the third layer of shots that usually come at him. And it's not like Kurtz is, an amazing combination puncher. You know what I mean? It's not like he's specialized at it, and he just did it because he realized like that was great game planning. Granted, he ended up getting submitted, which was confusing because I don't think anybody really saw that coming. But I do think it's important to note that I don't think Sugar Shane was getting hit with those shots by better strikers before this fight. I think that he definitely is. Like, I think that weight cut's getting harder for him, and I think it's affecting his fighting ability. But moving past that, 100, do you have any thoughts on the overall featherweight division? I know you're not super.
No. No, I was just realizing that I don't know shit about the UFC featherweight division. No, I mean, I'm being honest. I just realized that most of the people that I liked are old and sort of in this steep decline, have stopped competing or are just coming back, like Chad Mendes. And I'm looking at the top 5, and most everybody there is old, save for Max Holloway, Brian Ortega, and there's even Renato Moicano. Like he ain't that young, or is he? He feels like he's been around for 1,000 years.
I mean, he was only got like 7 fights in the UFC. He's not that. He's not some crusty old veteran.
No, but let me think how old he is.
I think he's like 26 or something like that.
He's 29 years old, so he's not that old.
He's young in MMA years, though, I think.
I'm sure. I don't know.
I'm checking out.
Yeah, no,
oh wow, no,
I don't think he's. Yeah, I don't think Moicano has been in the UFC in terms of amount of years for that long, because he basically showed up a year.
4 years.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so going to be almost 4 years now. But he's like the newest guy there. I feel like, as far as my recollection takes me, I don't know. I guess it's kind of those things that it seems to be aging the division, and the people at the top don't seem to be moving a lot.
Well, I mean, you look at the current generation of featherweights that are coming up. Ortega is on that phenom streak, so he's rushing all the way up to the top really fast. And Max Holloway sort of started in Connor's generation, but almost all his fights are in the UFC, so he had a lot of time to develop there. So even if he seems he's been there forever, he's not actually that old, that way into the fight game by now. He's still quite young. Of that.
7 of the top 15, I don't think would be considered veterans. You got Holloway, Ortega, Marcano, Bektic, Volkanovski, Sharipov, and Yara Rodriguez. And granted, I think a lot of them are going to end up moving up to lightweight, to be honest. I think Holloway, Ortega, and even Marcano. I think honestly, most of these guys, except for maybe Volkanovski, might end up at featherweight, at lightweight, except for Bektic and Volkanovski, I think.
Yeah, but for example, let me just say some things like Brian Ortega, and Max Holloway. Maybe it's just like this recent string of main events falling out, but I just don't think Max Holloway and Brian Ortega can make that cut for much longer. Jose Aldo is old, Frankie Edgar is old, Renato Moicano, maybe. I mean, Chad Mendes is old, Jeremy Stephens is old, Cub Swanson is old, Misrat Bektic, maybe he's a champion in waiting. I don't know. He looks fine. Josh Emmett, I don't know if he woke up from that last time he got KO'd. Chan Sung Jung, he's old. Also, he has a bunch of injuries and he's come back from an injury. Alexander Volkanovski, he's not old, but he's too large. Maybe he can't make featherweight. Ricardo Lamas, he's old. Darren Elkins is alive. Sabir Magomed Sharipov, he shouldn't be cutting that much weight. And Jair Rodriguez, the same thing.
But they are. But they are.
It's frustrating.
They are.
It's frustrating. But I'm so paranoid that I have no faith that either of those guys is going to keep making weight. That's my point. Also, the not old people. The old people, you do you, but you're on your way up.
Yeah, but I mean, how many of the younger fighters did the old fighters actually fight though? And I'm not talking about Chad Mendes fighting Miles Jury or Darren Elkins going on his run or Josh Emmett fighting Jeremy Stephens, because those fighters comparatively they've been in the UFC for quite a while compared to guys like Alexander Volkanovski, Yael Rodriguez,
Volkanovski is the next champ.
Magomedov.
Yeah. You think he can beat Bektic?
No, Volkanovski is the next champ.
You think he can beat Bektic?
Yeah, I think he would beat Bektic. I think he would beat
I'm uncertain about that. But yeah, just to zoom out a bit on featherweight as a whole, the division seems to be really coming into the new fighters coming really into the fore now. And while some of them like and Korean Superboy were a bit rushed into the top 10 and lost, I still have kind of hope for them because they're both still young, they're both still learning. Having a loss or two right now in MMA isn't that bad. It's happened to lots of other fighters before who've turned it around because they still need to get into their prime. And then you look beyond that and it's still filled with killers because you have Zabit Magomedov, who I disagree with the fact that he is in the top 15, but who's a better grappler on the ground than him right now? Look at Bektic, who's uncomfortable on the feet, but his transitions and lockdown ground game are outstanding. You have Volkanovski, who's sort of like this wrestle kickboxer, who will kickbox into the clinch and then take the fight from there as if it was Kane JDS 2 or 3.
I love his fight peekaboo guard for MMA.
Yeah.
I absolutely love it.
Yeah, because he's not afraid of the takedown. Like he's out of everyone, bar maybe Ortega, he seems the most confident out there because he knows what he wants to do. He doesn't panic. He makes the right decisions, and he's not afraid of getting into striking or wrestling exchanges. And he does really well even when in those.
I think he'll be the best matchup of that group, potentially against Ortega, to be honest.
Yeah, I can see that.
About this division, I'm bummed. I'm just bummed. My paranoia won't. Honestly, if Brian Ortega can't make weight, I'm not gonna be surprised.
I also look at the featherweight division kind of very similarly to the welterweight division right now. It's a division in flux. You have the older guys aging out, and a lot of the newer guys are there, to make the next step, but may or may not be ready, or were pushed back already once, so we're kind of like not super confident about them. And I think that's important to recognize, because that doesn't mean that they're not gonna be elite. It just means that they're either not ready yet, or they have already tried and pushed back because they weren't ready at the time. And that way, a lot of people lost confidence in them. If you think about it, the best way to look at it is take a guy like Ryan Bader, because most of I have to bring Bader.
No, I know you love Ryan Bader. Go on, Bader.
I love Ryan Bader almost as much.
We support you, man. We support you.
Thank you. I would watch him do anything. Now, Ryan Bader is a guy who grew up in the UFC. The guy came on tough. I think he only had a few fights before he came onto the Ultimate Fighter. He won the Ultimate Fighter because he's the best. And we watched him grow and grow, but he struggled and he faltered, and he kept getting knocked down. And everyone looks at him and is like, oh, it's Ryan Bader, who gives a shit. But realistically, the guy is probably the second best light heavyweight in the world right now, assuming DC is still considered a light heavyweight, I guess. But who's better than him resume-wise? I guess Jones. I don't know if I can count it until he actually fights, passes his drug test, and doesn't get suspended. I'll count him. Until that happens, he's the second best light heavyweight in the world, including DC. He's got a better resume than Gustafsson, and I just don't see how you can ignore that. And he's a legitimately elite fighter, and that's important to note. And we see that it sometimes takes a really long time to get there, because they just aren't there at the time we thought they would be. Not everyone is on the phenom track like Ortega, Jones, potentially Adesanya. It's not something we see always. So I think that's important to note with the featherweight prospects, is that the featherweight division and the welterweight division are very similar spots right now. You have a bunch of up-and-comers who may or may not be ready right now or when they tried. And I think that's important to note with guys like Magomedcharipov, Volkanovski. We had the first layer breakthrough. We had Ortega and Holloway breakthrough. And I think it's time for us to see the next one come soon, as Aldo and Stevens and Swanson age out.
You're giving me hope.
That's what I'm here for.
Yes.
I'm a beacon of hope in this dark and dreary world.
Speaking of dark and dreary world, Adesanya is not that young, dude. He's 29.
He's 29, but he's also at middleweight, and he's also young in MMA. I think that Patrick,
he has a lot of mileage, though.
What did you say?
He has a lot of mileage. He has a ton of fights. He got KO'd once, badly KO'd. Remember? I don't remember where it was. Okay. He got KO'd.
I understand that, but Alistair Overeem's been knocked out like 40,000 times, and he's
but Alistair Overeem lives knocked out. That's his life.
Yeah, I know, that's true. He's more out cold than he is awake.
Yes, and at the
yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that's how Overeem sleeps at night.
Unconscious and staring at it. He just has he has Francis Ngannou come in every night to put him to sleep.
Yeah.
But Adesanya is very reflexes dependent. So he's there because we can say that he jumped he unlike Bader, he is in the phenom track, but we did not see him when he was struggling and slowly building up his abilities up to where he is now. I mean, his kickboxing record is something fucking insane, like 81.
It's 75-4 at the UFC graphic.
That total 75, 5 losses, 1 draw. That's what it says.
That's insane. Though, Wonder Boy officially has a kickboxing record of 57-0, and Lucas Bordeaux wants to murder everybody in the world who quotes that. So, I don't. But my understanding is that Adesanya has a legitimate kickboxing record.
Oh yes, he does. But his struggles, if they could be called that, are probably to be found somewhere in that massive number of fights. So there's a reason why he's getting into the UFC when he is getting into the UFC. Bader, he did not have that shot. He didn't have an opportunity to sort of grow anonymously like Adesanya done. And so he understandably struggled. He He's probably the best light heavyweight, not accounting for John Jones right now. He could be DC, I think.
No, I still don't think that. But I mean,
I do.
yeah, but bringing Peter as an example is a good reason why you shouldn't forget about Mirsad Bektik, Ben.
Yes, Bektic is
How
great.
could you? Yeah.
I'm not forgetting about Bektic. I'm not. I know that he definitely still has potential. I'm going to go to bat for my boy Volkanovski every single time.
Bektic has a better mustache.
None of you can make me change my mind.
Bektic has a better mustache. That should account
Yeah.
for something.
Is it better what?
Mustache.
But
Yeah, he looks like a trainee in a 80s cop movie parody.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I have a beard and Bektic has a beard. Not Bektic. Volkanovski has a beard. And while I had more hair, I had a similar hair growth style to Volkanovski. So fight me IRL.
Mustaches are better than beards, Ben. You can
No,
twirl them.
they're not. No. They're only
Since
better.
we know that they
better.
confirm.
They are
Huh?
only better. They are only better when they are the porn stash, and I mean like a big ass.
Bektic has a porn mustache.
Does he?
He does. That alone should make him better. Look at this beautiful picture. I'm gonna send it to Black.
That's what dyes his hair blue.
Who?
Bektic dyes his hair like stupid colors.
No, he's young. He's trying new things. Just look at his mustache. Look at that mustache.
Volkanovski's like 30 years old, and that makes me like that. Like I really relate to. I'm not 30, but I really relate to like the style. I think he reminds me a lot of Bader. I mean, he's more skilled than Bader overall, I would say, but he reminds me a lot of Bader as a fighter, where he's just gonna keep grinding away, keep growing, keep pushing it, and I think that he's gonna hit the elite quicker than Bader was able to. Mostly because of the fact that he's a featherweight, and I think at light heavyweight he might suffer some more knockouts, along with pretty much anyone. Because for all we make fun of light heavyweight and heavyweight being shallow as shit, the bottom line is that they hit fucking hard, like really hard, and that can't be done. And that does change things a lot from the lower weight classes, and we have to acknowledge that that is something impressive that a lot of heavyweights have to deal with. The power discrepancy between the lighter weight classes and the heavyweight classes.
Yeah.
How could you? But how could you not see a bit of Bader in Bektik? Because both are sort of these hyper athletic wrestlers who are less than comfortable on the feet.
I don't think Bader's that hyper athletic, though. At least I don't think Bader is in the same level of athleticism as Bektic is. I think Bektic is a super athlete. Bader is more like.
Well, it's light heavyweight.
True. I mean, if you're comparing the level of athleticism. Like Bader is a level below, a guy like Johnson, for example, Anthony Johnson. He does it like Johnson is more athletic, more than Bader, for example. Not Jones. Is Bader the second best athlete at light heavyweight?
He probably is. I mean, think about it. Anthony Johnson. Let's think about Anthony Johnson for a second. Now that you mentioned it and that we're rambling, was he really that great an athlete? Because he could punch really, really hard. But what else did he show athletically?
He covers distance really quickly, quickly.
But is that because of explosion, or is that because he just knew that if he could plaster you, he could put you down real quick?
I mean, he was a 240-pounder moving quicker than everyone else at the weight class. Even the athletic guys like Gustafsson or Bader, or like he covers distance really quickly for such a massive individual. And even at welterweight, when he was like cutting 4,000 pounds somehow and not going into kidney failure somehow, he managed to do it at middleweight of all freaking places. He was still very quick. Like he was still able to cover distance despite being so huge. I think that he was definitely probably the most athletic in that distance covering mold.
But isn't that the same realm of athleticism isn't that the same realm of athleticism of Melvin Gillard? Do you remember Melvin Gillard? For Melvin.
Oh boy, do I remember Melvin Gillard.
Yeah, isn't that this in the same realm of like awesome, like explosion, and then not a lot ever elsewhere? Like he didn't have a particularly great chin, he didn't have a particularly great cardio, and well, his decision making is not athleticism, but he didn't make particularly good decisions either.
I would say he was a pure athletic.
Well,
as opposed to the overall.
yeah, sort of.
Mm.
Yeah,
Fair
no,
enough.
because you look at Rumble. Rumble was able to move DC around, right? Even to the extent where you can even draw parallels between what the success Lewis did have with what Rumble did to DC in the first and second fights. Like it was always going to be a losing battle, but if you can just stand up from a takedown and then grab DC and rotate him around so that he's on the fence, you have to be pretty freaking strong to do that because.
For sure.
It's the only people who've competed him there or who have beaten him there or made him look less than perfect are Jones and Rumble.
And
Because
Usyk.
Gus hit him with quite a bit. Gus hit him with quite a bit, but Gus couldn't really move him around at all. It was sort of in spots.
We should bring it back to featherweight though, because we got a little off topic, which is fine. We can do that. It's our podcast. We can do
So Bektic has a mustache. He's amazing. He's better than Volkanovski. And when they fight, he's gonna knock him out.
No, he's not. And the problem with Bektic is that the thing is, okay, so we have to look at like the featherweight prospects overall. I think at the end of this conversation, we can kind of conclude that featherweight is just in flux. It's not that there's any reason to doubt the new wave. It's just that they may not be there yet, or they just haven't had the opportunity to show. Because let's put it this way: do you really have any reason to think that Volkanovski can't beat someone at the top like Cub Swanson, who's ranked higher than him? Or honestly, I would love to see Volkanovski fight Aldo. I think that is a perfect fight to put together. Although, being a huge Aldo fan, I also don't want to see that right now. Because I honestly think Volkanovski might beat him.
Yes. Well, who knows? Depends on the state of his wrestling defense.
Correct. No, I don't think there's anything wrong with Aldo's wrestling defense at the moment. I'm saying that I think Volkanovski will force Aldo to fight at a pace that he can't keep as well, just like in the Holloway fights. Just the Holloway fights, really.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there.
Here in this
I'd pick Volkanovski to beat someone like Mendes, for instance. Which, I mean, at this point, it's always a bit of a gamble because he hasn't proven himself that much, or at least at that level yet. But you look at the style, Mendes doesn't throw that much volume. He's probably going to want to get off single counters like he has in all his recent fights. And he doesn't really circle off the cage when pressured that well. All those sort of play into Volkanovski's game. And Volkanovski himself, it's not like someone where when people have shot in on him, it's not like as if he's been doing it against really bad wrestlers. Because Elkins was able to compete with Bektic in the cage wrestling, for instance. But he seems to make the right decisions, and most importantly, he knows when to disengage, which is a skill that you have to normally have a lot of experience to get, but he seems to understand almost out the gate.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that a couple things. One, Volkanovski used to fight at welterweight. So, that's important. And two, he passed the fighting other grinders test, which is something that we usually go like, oh, but can he beat another grinder? He passed it twice with Jeremy Kennedy and Darren Elkins. And he didn't fall into the same trap as Mirsad Bektic, the hyper athlete. And something that's also important is that even though he's a prospect and he's still growing, even though he's 18-1, earlier in his career, he was knocked out. He got TKO'd by a head kick and punches from some dude named Corey Nelson at welterweight. And, that is like his fourth fight. So he knows also, to see him fight with such a style, that aggressive fighting style that he employs, that high volume, high pace, high pressure, knowing that he's been knocked out and knows what it feels like, is a very, very good sign for someone like Volkanovski in particular, because we see Bektic does not handle that very well. He's kind of like, he's so high strung on the feet, and he doesn't really want to be in exchanges, and he looks always so tense, and he never looks comfortable on the feet. Meanwhile, you have Volkanovski, who's like, I'm gonna throw hands, and you're gonna throw hands back, and I'm gonna win.
Yeah, Bektic does have an inner Derek Brunsonness to how he holds himself when he's in the stand-up, though. That's true.
So, are we saying that Bektic is the Brunson of featherweight?
No, how dare you?
No, he's the beta. He's the beta of featherweight, clearly.
No, you can't. No, don't turn this on me. Don't you make me vote against Volkanovski. Don't you try this. I'm not falling for it.
She's more Bader.
Nobody, but Bader is the only Bader.
Nope. Look, listen, Ben. They're a bit similar. You have to admit that Bektic is a little bit more similar than Volkanovski to Bader, at least.
But he's not Bader, so I don't care.
Volkanovski isn't either.
Yeah.
Right, but I like Volkanovski.
Yeah, Volkanovski reminds me a bit of Kane. Or even he's a bit more similar to like Matt Brown in the way he approaches the fight. Actually, no, wait, Weidman.
Brown?
I think that's
Brown, right?
probably the most apt comparison. Because no, I said Weidman. Chris Weidman.
Interesting.
Yeah, because in Weidman's peak, he'd always pressure, but he didn't just pressure forward mindlessly. He would take steps back to disengage from striking exchanges if he felt that it wasn't safe there, and then continue the pressure afterwards, which Volkanovski does. He pressures forward, and if you hit the clinch, he'll work there. But if he sees you want to counter, he'll take a step back. In the Elkins fight, he even fired off a few of his own counters when Elkins tried pressuring back. So he has a second layer there, but it's not like him just walking forward and with uber confidence in every exchange. Well, he is obviously very confident, but he seems to make the right decisions of when to engage and not. So if you see someone coming forward and he's not ready to respond immediately with a counter to that, he'll take a step back and then continue the pressure immediately afterwards. Or he'll try countering. Or he'll just walk. If he sees you at the fence, he'll walk into the clinch knowing that you are trapped on the fence and he can work there.
Yeah.
So
that's why he's
not that much like, but it's not much like Bader. Bader's sort of a bit uncomfortable on the feet, but he'll box in order to set down his shots, or if he feels really uncomfortable, he'll just shoot anyway. Which reminds me a bit more of Bektic because, like as you said, he's kind of high strung on the feet, so he needs to get more experience to loosen up.
He needs confidence. He needs to talk to somebody that will tell him that everything will be okay. That's what Bektic needs. Maybe that's Fira Zahavi, right? I mean, he's training at
Zahavi. He's training by Zahavi now, right?
Yes, he used to be training at ATT, and then he took like a sabbatical or something. And he was like training at different places, and then he somehow ended up at TriStar, and that's where he's staying. And that's why
to Jackson's then, either Jackson's or weirdly enough, Nova Unyao, because. Isn't like Aldo is kind of like a coiled spring too. I mean, I've heard this discussed by Pat and Connor on Heavy Hands. This comparison between Bektic and Aldo in the way they strike, at least in their tenseness, I guess.
Rafael Cordeiro
what?
At Kings MMA. Rafael Cordeiro at Kings MMA would do good for him.
I think so as well. But I don't think Bektic is a natural pressure fighter though. I don't think that's the natural path for him. So I think maybe working his counter, like he seems to want to learn. He seemed to try and force it against someone like Elkins, right? And it backfired. And I think ever since then, he's kind of just been like doing the aggressive counter puncher sort of thing, or like just sitting back and waiting sometimes.
Well, he's doing the technical kickboxer type thing, and he's very good at that. He's probably a good fit for him.
I think he would do well training with Aldo, like actually learning and working with Aldo directly.
The problem with that is that Nova União doesn't exist anymore.
Right, so that's what I mean, literally training with Aldo. Like go get Aldo, text him, tweet him, direct message him with Google Translate, and get him to want to train you and say, listen, I respect you. I love you. I want to be your protege. Teach me your ways, oh great master Aldo. And they both have porn stashes they can work. So it's great.
There you go.
Well, I mean, yeah, but the TriStar isn't the worst place for someone with those tendencies, because they basically they GSP made a name for them for being, this wrestlebox all-rounded camp. But if you actually look at the fighters coming out of them, they try to push for being well-rounded, but it sort of is based on this rangy kickboxer game where they don't want to be in the pocket, they want to be out at range,
But
and then they want to be constantly mixing it up with their well-roundedness. But in the meantime, they want to be at range.
But he's not a rangy dude, nor is he really at his best when he's fighting at range. Bektic, despite his tenseness and he doesn't want to really be in exchanges, he's kind of at his best when he's in the pocket boxing range, I would say, and landing his ridiculously explosive and powerful shots. And that's when I think he's honestly at his best, at least personally, from my point of view. Like if he was able to learn how to hone that first round version of himself versus Elkins and not get suckered in to the Elkins fight in the second and third, that I think would be his best style, really. Just get into pocket boxing range, use his athletic ability while also honing his technical skills so that as he gets older, he won't have to rely on that athleticism anymore. And kind of work that kind of game, and his wrestling will always be there for him if he needs to, and he can kind of learn. The thing that always bothered me about these hyper athlete grapplers is that a lot of them just never learn a good submission game, and that's something I always loved about Chris Weidman, is that he did develop a really good submission game to work with. Granted, you haven't seen it. Well, we saw it against Gastelum. What am I talking about? Aside from Gastelum, we haven't really seen it, but it's there. And it's something that never made sense to me. Like, if you are able to dictate the fight generally and get your opponent on their back, why the hell would you just do ground and pound when you learn a submission or two? Learn two submissions that work back and forth, and you can always have that in your back pocket as something to add to that ground and pound and things. So, yeah, that's just a tangent that bothers me. So we talked a lot about Bektic and Volkanovski, actually, now that I think about it specifically. What about your overall thoughts on this, what we'll see, I guess, in the near future? Let's talk about the next 2 years down the line. What do you think we'll see from the new breed, I guess? Do you think Holloway and Ortega will be sticking around at featherweight? What do you think we'll see from Moicano and Magomed Rodriguez, Bektic, and Volkanovski? Where do you think we'll see them in the next 2 to 3 years from now? We'll start with you, Bilal.
Okay, so maybe from the top down with Holloway. I'm actually not so sold if he can be, the next Aldo of the division. Partly because the division is looking like it's going to be stacked. And also partly because the only real wrestler he fought was Lamas recently. And Lamas wildly overreacted to that guillotine attempts Max Strike getting off on him. He was giving up his back immediately after Max Strike grabbing it. And that's not something you see often. So I'd imagine that he hasn't really fought someone like Volkanovski or Bektic, who if they shoot on him, they are likely to get a clean shot and take him to the ground, and then he'll have to work his way up. Whereas, let's say the other high volume striker in Robert Whittaker at middleweight, we've seen guys try to wrestle him. Jacare tried taking his back. Romero tried using his wrestling to tie him out and disrupt him. And he escaped both those situations using his wrestling skills. It wasn't just a once-off submission attempt and then that was it. So I still have my questions about Holloway. But the rest of the division is looking quite varied. Where, like at welterweight, you see sort of one or two strikers coming up there who haven't really fought that many wrestlers up to a certain point. And then you see just kind of this whole group of athletic wrestlers making their way up. Whereas in featherweight, you see sort of this weird mix of styles where Zabit is throwing wild spinning shit all the time. and then he backs it up with this body lock wrestling, with this upper body wrestling and ground game, which seems to drown everyone he's fought so far. Then you have Rodriguez, who throws even more spinning shit, but at such high volume that, like, if one of those 100 connects, it ends the fight. Then Superboy for his more boxing focused approach, although he still needs a lot of work there. Then Volkanovski for, as I mentioned, he's sort of like wrestle kickboxer game where he won't exactly start shooting immediately for everything, but he'll work like a clinch focused kickboxer. And once he gets to the clinch, then he lets his wrestling flow. And yeah, and you mentioned Bektik also, but there's tons others like Shane Burgos, who we started this topic with also. He's uh, an aggressive counterpuncher who relies only on head movement as opposed to the other kickboxers in the division. That's wildly different from them. And finally, you reach guys like Calvin Cato and Renato Mocano, who are perhaps not, the definition of an ideal prospect because of their age, but they are just fundamentally good in all phases, it seems, and that's scaring them. So you have this high variety mix of styles happening. And I think in the next few years, we're going to see those sort of filtering each other out, where the guys who rely on the wrestling will have to come up with a concrete game if they want to be on top, while guys like might fall behind if they can't plug up the deficiencies in their striking. Because until they do that, even if they can stop a takedown, it's if you get pressured every time someone runs at you into the fence, then you are most likely going to get taken down. And I think that's going to end up filtering down through the rest of the filtering up into the top 10 as the old guys get replaced, and you have this, high variety of new fighters coming in there, and whoever develops properly and will end up on top for probably long. Whereas others, like what we've seen from Superboy recently, they just struggle to fill in the technical gaps in their own strong points and kind of fall on the wayside.
All right. What do you think, Alejandro? Give us your thoughts on the overall state of the division and what you think we can expect in the next few years.
The overall state of the division seems to be like they are not, as we were mentioning before. I don't think that these people are like the newer breed, so to speak, are not in phase with the old breed, and so we're going to see a lot of turnover. But I also think that we're going to see people just change weight classes. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have a lot of faith in Ortega. I don't have a faith in Holloway. I don't have a faith in Magomed Sharipov, and I don't have a faith in Rodriguez staying there. I think that they're going to change weight classes, especially if you look at their ages. They are going to keep getting older. They're going to keep putting on weight, and it's going to be harder and harder to make that cut. So the weight class that we see in a couple of years may look very different just because a lot of the older generation are going to sort of flush out from the top 10, and we're going to see people like uh, probably Volkanovski stays and Bektic stays, but I don't know who else is going to be there. Like, we're going to have to go back to Calvin Cater, probably Shane Burgos, but Shane Burgos shouldn't be there anyways. So I don't know. I mean, to me, it's like a huge question mark as of what happens with it, at least at the higher level. And that's pretty much all I got.
No problem. That's good enough. Well, my simple thoughts are obviously, you bring up a good point where, we could see a kind of exodus as these guys age where they can't wait anymore. There's always that.
Especially since people are becoming more conscious about their weight cutting practices now.
I agree. I do think that it's not as important right now. We can't plan for a mass exodus. We just can't. It's impossible. And what we need to do is kind of look at what we have now. What we have now is a group of fighters who, like you said, they're kind of an eclectic mix of styles. And that's going to make for some really interesting style matchups as we see them come up and fight each other once they're kind of in their primes. I do think that, we have reason to believe that there's a lot to be excited about. And worst case scenario, we see them all fight at lightweight, which will just be awesome too. It's not like it's a bad thing that they're going to be at lightweight. Lightweight's already the best division, but I can use a couple more awesome fighters. Why not? Especially
Also,
the eventual 165 division.
yes, they could fill that gap, and we could get actual 145ers now.
I would like to see it, but right now, what I see happening with the division is continued growth from a lot of these fighters, and we're just going to see some really impressive fights and performances, and there's a lot to be excited about. So,
I'm especially excited at seeing Tony Ferguson throw an eliminatory role against Brian Ortega in the next 2 years. So,
dude, Tony Ferguson is not staying at lightweight. He's going to go to welterweight. He's been talking about this for a long time. He refers to him as a welterweight. So don't expect him to stay for long at lightweight.
But who will eliminatory roll against Brian Ortega then? Like, Tony Ferguson has both those things down, doing crazy shit in fights and rolling.
Okay, so imagine Jair Rodriguez eventually going up to lightweight, because I think he's just 26 years old, and I think he can barely make the weight. So he's likely going to be there. So maybe one day you see him fighting Tony Ferguson, like next year, if he keeps winning. That would be fun.
Yes, it would.
It would be a slaughter, though. But
with that, though, we've come to the end of our first episode. Hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully we improved on some of the things that from the last episode, which will never see the light of day after this again. We will never let anybody listen to that after this. So thank you so much for joining us. Bilal, Alejandro, any final words you'd like to say before we end this?
I'm just going to say thank you. If you have any comments or suggestions, we are open to hearing them. And again, thanks for your attention.
Yeah, I just like to echo that. Thank you for everyone for watching this. And our, I don't know if we should call it our episode 0.5, but
let's call it episode
thanks for your feedback. Yeah, let's call it 0.5. But yeah, so thanks for everyone who gave feedback on that there, and everyone who might give feedback on this while we still get our experience in our cage time.
Yes,
definitely. And Bilal, if you want me to echo Alejandro, I'm pretty sure I have the capability of just turning up his echo.
I'll remember that there, but I'm pretty sure most people like his accent anyway. So.
Oh God, it's so sexy.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining us on the Guillotine Guard Pull podcast. I've been your host, Ben Cohn. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully you enjoy this podcast.
Wait, didn't we do did we like flip a coin to say the name?
We did flip a coin. All right. Now everybody knows. Oh God, we flipped a coin and it turned out to be MMAngst. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna try it. I might edit that out. I might edit this out.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for joining us on the MMAngst podcast, episode 0.5, clearly. Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good day.
Thanks.